Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive. Today we're going to try to answer a question that's been debated for over a century. Did the Treaty of Versailles, the one that was supposed to bring peace after World War I, did it actually help create the conditions that led to totalitarian regimes like Nazi Germany?
Well, it's definitely a complicated question, but if we really break it down, look closely at the treaty itself and the historical context, we can start to see how decisions made in 1919 might have had some seriously unintended consequences.
Right, because it's so easy now to look back and be like, oh, well, that was obviously a bad idea. But we have to remember, what was the world like back then?
Exactly. Think about Europe in 1919. I mean, the war's just ended, millions are dead, economies are in shambles. Everyone wants to avoid another catastrophe like that,
That
right?
makes sense.
So the victorious allies, especially France, they'd suffered so much, they were determined to make Germany pay and ensure it would never threaten Europe again.
So you're saying the Treaty of Versailles came from this desire for security and maybe even a little bit of revenge. But didn't things sort of backfire?
Yes. Sometimes the best intentions can lead to really unexpected outcomes. Take, for example, the idea of self-determination. That was a huge part of Woodrow Wilson's 14 points.
Oh, right. The idea that nations should be able to govern themselves, make their own choices without interference.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Sounds great in theory, right?
definitely.
But the treaty's application of this principle was, well, a little uneven. It did lead to the creation of new nation states based on ethnicity. But it also created new minorities and border disputes, especially in Eastern Europe, and that contributed to a lot of tension and instability.
So while they were trying to promote peace, they might have actually been planting the seeds for future conflict.
That's a good way to put it. A perfect example is the Polish corridor. This was a strip of land given to Poland to give them access to the sea, which, sounds fair, right? But it cut right through Germany and separated East Prussia from the rest of the country.
Oh, well, I can see how that would cause resentment.
Exactly. It was a major source of resentment for Germany. They felt like they were being punished.
So it seems like the treaty, though aiming for peace and stability, might have actually made things worse by ignoring the complexities of national identities and territorial claims.
And then you have the issue of reparations. Germany was forced to make these huge payments to compensate for the damages caused by the war. And those payments, on top of their already shattered economy, well, it crippled them.
I've read about that. John Maynard Keynes, the economist, he was part of the British delegation at the peace talks. He warned about the dangers of those reparations. He said it would just breed resentment and hinder economic recovery.
He was absolutely right. Those crushing reparations, combined with the Great Depression in the 1930s, created a perfect storm of hardship in Germany. People were desperate for any solution, and that desperation made them vulnerable to extremist ideologies.
It's kind of like when you squeeze a balloon, right? You push down on one part and it bulges out somewhere else.
That's a great analogy. The pressure on Germany created the perfect conditions for extremist ideologies, like Nazism, to take root.
It's scary how these things connect. And
Yeah.
what about that war guilt clause? Didn't that force Germany to take all the blame for starting the war?
Yes, that was another big problem. It was meant to hold Germany accountable, but instead it just fueled humiliation and resentment among the German people.
So, despite the treaty's attempts at positive change, like trying to implement self-determination and creating the League of Nations, it also had these really problematic elements that ultimately undermined its goals.
Exactly. And speaking of the League of Nations, it was meant to prevent future wars, but it had no real power. Plus, big players like the United States didn't even join. This weakness would become very apparent later when Hitler started to ignore the treaty in the 1930s.
So, we've established that the Treaty of Versailles, despite its good intentions, had a lot of provisions that actually caused instability and resentment.
Yeah.
How did all this contribute to the rise of Hitler and the Nazi Party?
That's what we'll explore next time. We'll trace the path from this flawed peace treaty to the terrifying reality of totalitarian regimes.
So last time, we talked about how some parts of the Treaty of Versailles, like the war guilt clause and those massive reparations, they actually kind of had the opposite effect of what was intended.
Right. Instead of weakening Germany, they kind of fueled this resentment and anger. It was like the treaty accidentally gave extremist groups the fuel they needed to really take off.
And that's where Hitler and the Nazi Party come in.
Exactly. They were masters at taking advantage of the humiliation and anger that so many Germans were feeling at the time.
So they weren't just some random fringe group that suddenly appeared. They were capitalizing on a very real and widespread discontent.
Yeah, Hitler was really good at playing on people's fears and anxieties. He pointed the finger at scapegoats like the Jews and communists. He blamed them for Germany's problems.
And I guess those simple explanations were really appealing to people who were struggling.
Exactly. Hitler offered these simple, albeit dangerous, solutions to complex problems. He promised to bring back national glory, to make Germany great again, and that resonated with people who were suffering because of the treaty.
And then the Great Depression hit. Did that make things worse?
Absolutely. The Depression was a global crisis, but Germany was hit especially hard. Hyperinflation wiped out savings, unemployment went through the roof.
Wow, so people were really desperate.
Yeah. And when people are that desperate, they're more willing to listen to extreme voices, even dangerous ones. Hitler offered jobs, he restored a sense of national pride, and he promised to fix everything.
It's kind of like if you're lost in the woods.
Right.
You're so desperate to find a way out that you might follow any path, even if it's dangerous.
That's a great analogy. And Hitler was very skilled at leading people down that dangerous path. So we see how the treaty set the stage for extremism. But how did Hitler actually come to power? Was it like a sudden takeover or more of a gradual thing?
Yeah, I've always wondered about that.
It was definitely a gradual process. The Nazis gained popularity in the 1932 elections, but they didn't win a majority.
So how did they go from a popular party to having total control?
Well, in 1933, there was a fire in the Reichstag, the German parliament building. No one's really sure how it started, but Hitler used it to his advantage. He blamed the communists and created a climate of fear.
So he kind of manufactured a crisis to grab more power.
Exactly. He used the fire as an excuse to suspend civil liberties. And then the German parliament passed the Enabling Act in 1933, which essentially gave Hitler dictatorial powers. That was pretty much the end of democracy in Germany.
Wow. So from there, they were able to transform Germany into a totalitarian state. How did that happen so fast?
The Nazis were ruthless and very organized. They controlled the media, education, even the arts. They used propaganda to spread their ideology. Anyone who disagreed with them was silenced or eliminated. It was a terrifying time.
And I imagine the economic problems caused by the Depression made people more willing to accept a strong leader, even a dictator, if it meant stability.
You're absolutely right. Totalitarian regimes often take root when people are scared and looking for easy answers. And the economic chaos of the 1930s created the perfect breeding ground for that kind of thinking.
So we've seen how a flawed peace treaty created the conditions for extremism, which then allowed a dictator to seize power. What happened next?
Well, that's where things get even scarier. Next time, we'll see how Hitler, emboldened by his success in Germany, turned his attention outward, violating the Treaty of Versailles and setting the stage for World War II.
It's amazing how we've gone from this treaty that was supposed to prevent war to, well, a dictator taking over Germany. But how did Hitler go from, leading Germany to actually starting another world war? It's hard to imagine.
I think a key thing to remember is that Hitler wasn't just interested in Germany. He had this grand vision of a greater German Reich. He wanted to create this huge empire across Europe.
So he was aiming to take over other countries from the start.
Yeah, that was his plan all along. And the Treaty of Versailles, with all its limitations on Germany, territorial losses and all that, it just fueled his anger.
So the treaty was like what, a personal insult to him?
In a way, yeah. He saw it as a symbol of Germany's humiliation, something to be overcome,
Yeah.
and he started by remilitarizing the Rhineland.
That was the area next to France that was supposed to be a demilitarized zone,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
To prevent conflict.
Exactly. But in 1936, Hitler just sent troops in, completely ignoring the treaty. It was a huge gamble. He was testing the waters, seeing how the rest of the world would react.
And they didn't do much, did they?
No, Britain and France were still traumatized from World War I. They just wanted to avoid another war at all costs. They thought that if they gave Hitler a little, he would be satisfied.
So they appeased him.
Right, and that was a big mistake. Appeasement rarely works. It just shows the aggressor that they can get what they want without consequences. And that's exactly what Hitler learned. He realized that the world was afraid to stand up to him, and so he moved on to his next target, Austria.
That was the Anschluss when he annexed Austria. That was also against the Treaty of Versailles. Right?
Absolutely. Hitler claimed that Austria and Germany were one people and should be unified. And in 1938, he took action. German troops marched into Austria. There was very little resistance, and Austria became part of Germany. And again, the world just watched.
It's like a domino effect.
Yeah.
Each act of aggression makes the next one easier.
Exactly. And the appeasement continued. Hitler then set his sights on Czechoslovakia, specifically a region called the Sudetenland, which had a large German population. He claimed it rightfully belonged to Germany.
And that's what led to the Munich Conference, right? Where Britain and France basically gave the Sudetenland to Hitler to avoid war.
Right. The Munich Conference became a symbol of the failure of appeasement. It showed Hitler that he could get what he wanted just by making threats he didn't even have to fight.
So he was like a bully who realizes he doesn't even have to throw a punch to get what he wants.
Exactly. And of course, Hitler broke his promises at Munich. A few months later, he took over the rest of Czechoslovakia.
Wow. So the treaty that was designed to prevent war was being destroyed by the very country it was meant to control.
And the League of Nations, which was supposed to maintain peace, was completely ineffective. It was clear that no one was going to stop Hitler.
So what was the final straw? What finally started World War II?
It was the invasion of Poland in September 1939. This was Hitler's boldest move yet, a clear act of aggression that finally forced Britain and France to act. They declared war on Germany, and that was the beginning of World War II.
It's just incredible. The Treaty of Versailles, meant to create peace, might have actually helped start the war it was trying to prevent.
It's a reminder that history is complex. Our actions can have unintended consequences, and sometimes the best intentions can lead to terrible outcomes.
It also shows how important it is to understand history, not just as a bunch of dates and facts, but as a series of decisions that still affect us today.
Exactly. The Treaty of Versailles had a lasting impact on the world, and its echoes can still be felt in international relations and global politics.
Well, that was a fascinating, albeit somewhat depressing deep dive. It really makes you think about how easily peace can be shattered.
It definitely does. But it also reminds us of the importance of diplomacy, of understanding different perspectives, and of standing up to aggression.
Well, on that note, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you learned something new and that you'll keep questioning, keep learning, and keep exploring history. We'll see you next time.